Hello and welcome to the Internet of Things Made Simple. I'm Larry Humor. This is mini episode 20. Many thanks for joining us. As a reminder, we do a combination of full episodes, which are that 25 to 40 minute mark in length, and mini episodes, which are 6 to 20 minutes, I guess, depending on how much time a topic deserves. As of a few episodes ago, we decided to move to only mini episodes, and based on the increased number of downloads, you seem to approve. Shout out to our new listeners. Welcome aboard. I encourage you to check out our webpage, surprisingly called theinternetofThingsMadeSimple.com, which has some ebooks, blogs, and other things to further you on your IoT knowledge journey. And I humbly ask two things as always. Please subscribe to this podcast using your favorite podcast service, which is now easy as we are on over 24 or so. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast or on iTunes, kindly leave us a review. Preferably positive, but hey, even negative ones count too. In this episode, we're going to look at a number of items that have chosen to implement the power of IoT, yet they may not be among the list of things that you would expect would be early adopters of the technology. But as I always say, and will continue to say, IoT is all about information. And these examples will show how the power of knowing what is going on at all times can change your business forever. Before I get to the list, there are simply thousands of different examples that I could cover. These ones seem to not only be interesting, but they were easy to understand examples. If you wanted me to break down the value of IoT for a particular product or service, just drop me a note and you'll learn how to at the end of the podcast, and I will do so on a future podcast. If this list sounds at all familiar, it's from a list that was generated by John Vladimir Slamenka, I guess his name is pronounced, who is the regional president of EMEA at AT&T. Thanks for the list, JV, and on to it. The first example that we're going to cover has to do with a very important creature in our agricultural systems. No, not the farmer. We've already covered that on previous podcasts. We're talking about the bee, and specifically beehives. IoT is being used to understand all aspects of bee population in certain areas. Motion sensors can detect things like the volume of bees that have entered or exited the hive, their velocity of flight, which I found kind of interesting, and how far they may migrate or go to get their valuable supplies they need. This information can be gathered to observe patterns. Are the bees more active than normal? Perhaps they're needing to fly further to get what they need, and maybe there's a drop in the number of bees, and this could perhaps put the entire hive at risk. When you combine these things with other levels, like the amount of sunshine, the ambient temperature, toxins in the air, and perhaps even the amount of rain, which you might remember if you have kids and saw the Bee Movie, makes it very difficult for them to fly. I'm not sure if that's true, but it was kind of cool in the movie. When you put all these things together, you can learn about how it helps these little invaluable creatures continue to thrive and be more productive, which is good for all of us. On to example number 2. I've spoken about how drones are starting to be used for certain deliveries. This example is kind of related, as it's about robot couriers. I remember visiting an office, it had to be at least 15 years ago, and seeing what looked like a runaway mail cart making its way down the halls. Now, this is a pretty big place, and I was fascinated how this cart would just stop in front of each main desk in an area and let out what I can best describe as a weird bark noise. The reception or admin assistant would then get up, walk over to the cart, gather the mail for the team in their area, and the mail cart would continue on its journey. I asked someone, how did this work? Apparently, it's the result of some science fair that the company had sponsored, and they just really liked it and started using the device. I also kind of wondered how the unit knew to stop at each spot and follow this particular pattern. Apparently, they had to spray some sort of liquid along the wall on a regular basis. I believe it was monthly, and the unit sniffed, and I'm using air quotes here, its way along the path. I always thought that was quite advanced for its time. Today, we have much more advanced IoT sensors, cameras, and of course data analytics to improve on the sniffing robot from yesteryear. You're starting to see these devices become more commonplace in offices and to even make local deliveries from restaurants and drugstores. You can definitely expect this to continue and accelerate as we move forward. The third example occurs in a place where millions of people spend the largest part of their daily life. And no, I'm not talking about the lineup at Starbucks. It's at your office. both in the book. Here's a shameless plug. The book is called The Internet of Things Made Simple, and it's available in digital on Amazon and iBooks, and in paperback on Amazon. And now back to the podcast. I've spoken about how IoT is making the modern office more productive. It helps to optimize the environment, make things safer, and many more things, I guess. For this example, we're talking about office furniture. This part reminds me of the fun when you have more than one person drive the same car. In my case, I'm a few inches taller than my wife, and I like to sit back much more than she does. She basically has her face pressed up against the windshield. So when I try to get into the car after she uses it, I can barely fit between the seat and the steering wheel. Thankfully, our car has an automatic setting based on which key is used to access the car. Move the seats, the mirrors, and even put the preferred radio stations to the preference of that driver. The same concept works on some high-end furniture. On an increasing basis, companies are sharing workspaces among employees, especially if you're kind of transient employees like salespeople and mobile employees. When the cubicle detects their badge, it will change all the settings to meet their desired preferences. Chair, desk height, opening and closing the blinds, and even transition to a standing desk if that's their preference. This helps to maximize their productivity and to keep them healthy. On to point number 4. There's a joke among the running community in response to all those issues with gender and washrooms. Just ask a runner how to solve this. We've been using the same washrooms for years at races. They're also known as the porta potty. Now, I've spoken about these things before and how they're ripe for IoT usage, and in some cases, they're ripe in another way, but let's just move on from that point. The biggest issue IoT always had helping these devices is their lack of power and the high cost of a battery-powered solution needed to handle the often tough work environments they work in. You might not think about it, but they work in some pretty tough environments. These devices work in dusty areas, they're prone to weather changes, and even damage from drunk college kids having too much fun on a Saturday night. Not that I know anything about that, it's just what I've heard. Enter in technologies like Sigfox, CAT-M, and NB-IoT. Their lower cost components not only help to bring down the cost of hardware, but their extremely low power usage allows for a much longer battery life for devices. The result is that it often makes financial sense to monitor these devices, even more so if you combine a few of them together on the same cellular bill. On to example number 5. Every time I think of a luggage cart, I think of that not great movie with Tom Hanks, The Terminal. In this movie, Hank's character leaves his home country, and during the course of his flight, there's a bit of a coup, I guess, of some kind. And by the time he arrives, his country no longer exists. So he has to live in the airport terminal while this is all sorted out. Again, not a great movie here. Perhaps because I used to spend so much time in an airport terminal myself, this movie maybe just felt a little bit too close to home. I was kind of surprised to know that there was an issue with these carts being stolen. I've seen homeless people pushing shopping carts from the store around, but never an airport cart. Stuff kind of falls off them all the time. I guess this must have been an issue though, because somebody felt it necessary to spend money to track them. On to point number 6, and this is another word I have problems saying, tectonic plates. It seems like an absolute no-brainer to me. I was even surprised this wasn't done a long time ago. As I've said many times, IoT is about information, but I've also said many times that 99% of the information that most solutions produce is pretty much meaningless. Think of all the reports in a year that a fridge could send in, reporting hourly. How often does the fridge really fail, though? It's that 0.001% of messages that you actually care about. Well, probably not so for geologists, though. They're able to use thousands of sensors in a particular area, and they're able to use all of the information to form trends. Shifts, change in pressure, and they're able to use the most advanced AI and big data solutions to keep us all safe. A great use of IoT. Number 7 might be something that a big chunk of the US listeners and other countries have never heard of, and that's the snowblower. Or they may have heard of it, but perhaps they've never seen one. A quick story here comes to mind when a certain business person, I'm going to let them off the hook by keeping their name out of it, from the southern US, visited northern Alberta to sell something to an oil company. When they landed in the airport, They walked outside in the parking lot, and they noticed there was an electrical outlet in front of each parking space. They thought it was the coolest thing that the airport was just so friendly as to make it easy to charge your laptop. They were just so impressed by the level of care provided by Canadians. Sure, you could use that plug to charge a laptop, but they're actually there to plug in your car to keep the block heater warm in the nastiness that is a northern Canadian winter. If you live in an area that has those kind of plugs, you likely get a really good use out of your snowblower. One of the biggest pains to using a snowblower, even though it does a lot of the work for you, is you still have to go outside in that freaking cold and with ice and other different things. Enter in some thoughtful companies that are producing autonomous-driven snowblowers to do it for you. This goes along with these same autonomous lawnmowers, same concept. The final one, number 8, is one that I've mentioned before in a much earlier podcast, albeit from a different angle. In that podcast, I spoke about how sensors on board prosthetic limbs were allowing the device to become better at anticipating the movement of the wearer. So when they started to run, the device would detect this earlier and adjust the gait and different things to handle the extra speed and pressure. Another way that IoT is helping to make life better for those with these devices is by sending anonymous user data back to the manufacturer using onboard cellular modules. It's Cat-M in this case. The manufacturer can see the wear and tear of devices in real-time use and can make better adjustments in future designs. They're also able to get a better understanding of elements that customers might be subjecting their products to, like water, cold, etc., to know how to improve the design. As I've said earlier, there are thousands of great IoT examples out there. I look forward to helping you to better understand how it may help a particular product or service. You can definitely reach out to us to ask us that. The best place to start is our Facebook page, The Internet of Things Made Simple. In addition to links to podcasts and blogs, there's other material there as well. If we're personally connected on LinkedIn, please drop me a note that way. And if we're personally connected otherwise, drop me an email or text. As always, great talking to you. Talk soon. I'm Leonard About Humor.